All right, welcome Cynthia to Microsoft Research as part of your the talk that you're going to give in the next hour. Yeah, a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And to just get started with, I'd love to what got you started in the whole area of robotics, especially social robotics.
Yeah.
What were the biggest motivations and inspirations? And tell us about your initial part of your journey.
Yeah. So, I think looking back, I can tell a very linear story. When you're living life, it's really not that way. I mean, you go on various branches of your life's path, and you end up, where you end up, which has been an incredible journey. But for me, I mean, I do think it really started. I was 10, and the first Star Wars movie came out, and I think today, kids today don't understand what a phenomenon that was. It's like, I remember sitting in the theater, and the Imperial, whatever, Galactic Star Cruiser, whatever, was like going overhead, and like the seats were vibrating. It was just like this awe-inspiring experience from the very beginning. And then these droids came on the screen, and I just fell in love with them. And I think it's because they weren't just robots, like useful robots, but it was really because they were full-fledged characters. Yeah. They had rich personalities. They had relationships not only with each other, but with, the main human characters, and they really cared about one another. And I thought, that emotional connection really stuck with me. And, I think the whole world fell in love with those robots for a reason, And so, fast forward, I ended up doing my graduate work at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab before it was CSAIL, where Professor Rod Brooks was my advisor, and he's recognized as the father of autonomous robots. And I remember, when I was admitted as a graduate student and looking at the various schools and deciding where I should go, and I walked into Rod Brooks's lab, which was then called the Mobile Robotics Group. And I saw all these little insect-inspired robots. And a lot of the work then was around biological inspiration of intelligence. And I remember just thinking, oh my God, if those robots in Star Wars are ever going to really become a reality, it's going to start in a lab just like this. In fact, maybe this lab. And I'm like, I have to be here. So that was really it. And it was the promise of robots as artificial creatures, back then, very inspired by insects. But then you could imagine the evolution of that. And, we thought we would go from insects to like reptiles to like, I don't know, mammals or whatever. And then eventually maybe you get to people. But I remember when Rod went on sabbatical, he did this world tour. And he came back and he's like, we're doing humanoids. And we're like, what? It's like we just got done doing insects, we're doing humanoids. And it's because he spent time as part of that in Japan, and he had seen all of this humanoid work. And, back then, the reason why humanoid robotics was so important in Japan was just they were already grappling with this profound shift, right? Where the ratio of working age people to retired age persons was going to hit their country harder than many other countries. And they were already thinking about robots, right, as a way of helping to bridge that gap. But humanoid was because so much of our human engineered space was about this morphology, walking around, tools, everything was built for this morphology. So that's why you wanted humanoids. And I remember the day that I was still a graduate student. NASA landed, robots on Mars. And I remember thinking, because then the value proposition of autonomy was about the dull, dirty, and dangerous, far from people, right? That was why you did autonomous robots. And I remember thinking to myself, all right, here we are. We send robots into the oceans, we send them into volcanoes, and now we even land them on Mars. Why aren't they in our living rooms? And it was that moment that I'm like, it's because designing a machine, an intelligence that can deal with the inanimate world, navigating around rocks on Mars, is fundamentally different than designing an intelligent machine that has to interact with entities whose behavior is governed by having a mind. That was totally different. And nobody was really working on that problem of robots for the rest of us. It was always autonomous robots as tools for professionals. nobody was really thinking about autonomous robots in people's homes where young children to seniors and everyone in between would be able to interact and get value from this kind of technology. So that was the moment. And I remember I like marched into poor Rod's office and I'm like, I have to change everything. I'm stuffing my PhD topic. I'm changing it. I'm doing social human robot interaction. And that's when I started building Kismet. And he, I mean, to Rod's credit, he was like, that's an important problem. Go do it. Wow. You know, you might have thought he might have been a little freaked out having a student say, I have to change everything. But he was always so supportive, and he was always, I mean, I think one of his, you know, greatest strengths, he was always a visionary, yeah? And he could tell when there was a problem that was really worth pursuing. So anyway, I'm very fortunate, I think, to have been a student of Rod Brooks, because he gave me the freedom to do something crazy like Kismet, which was around this social, emotional, face-to-face interaction with robots. That was considered kind of crazy at the time.
Yeah, very inspiring. Yeah. I mean, having some time spent at MIT as well, I realized that, sometimes you have these ideas which might feel so out of the box, so difficult. So for instance, when we think about, these robots that would be around inanimate objects, like spiders around rocks, if you think about it, we know the laws of motions, the laws of physics for almost 300 years now. And even when we know those laws, building something is so difficult. Now you're getting into the realm of social robotics, where we don't have these laws well defined. We are still studying it. Don't you think it was kind of crazy? And what do you think, like, given that difficulty of this challenge, what hope do we have in accomplishing something like that in the next 5 to 10 years? What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, so I think, certainly as a graduate student, what we had known already from building these autonomous robots was that people had a very powerful tendency to want to anthropomorphize them, right? They didn't only think about them as kind of useful tools. I mean, they really, applied what we would call our kind of social thinking, theory of other minds and so forth, to try to reason about and make sense of the robot's behavior. So, one of the key starting hypotheses was, if this is how the human mind naturally is trying to make sense of this autonomous behaving entity, then what we need to do is understand that and design to support the way that people want to think about and understand and collaborate with these technologies. So it was always a very human-centered, human-driven process. The other thing, of course, is that, I recognized that trying to model adult human-human interaction was like, that's crazy, because we are the most socially, emotionally sophisticated species on the planet. So the thought was, what is the simplest social other that I could model that adults would still treat as a social entity? And so a lot of that work with Kismet was really inspired by social development of infant caregiver interactions. And so much of, the developmental psychology is about the critical roles that we as the caring, nurturing adults play in treating the infant, treating the baby as though he or she is fully socially intelligent and capable, because it's those interactions that are needed in order for the child to learn how to become. So you treat as though, so they learn to become. And so that was the paradigm behind Kismet. So it was all about this very first face-to-face social emotion where our communication starts and grows and develops over time. So that's kind of how I started, right? Just appreciating, you got to start kind of in the primordial aspect of this, but understanding and learning so much, just not about, emotion and social processes and theory of other mind processes on a machine. I mean, that's like whole new areas of AI now. But also starting to appreciate the human side of that partnership, right? So in reading that literature, I contrast it so much today, where so many of the AIs we interact with they feel very transactional. They feel very much like playing chess. I say something, machine responds. I say something, machine responds. Communication is not like that. Human communication is nothing like that. It's a dance. And often in a lot of this literature, they talk about the mother-infant dance. And it's because the way we communicate and collaborate is so dynamic and interwoven and mutually regulating that's what we do in order to really coordinate states of mind and behavior. That was obvious to me at the time that was one of the biggest challenges of creating this kind of socially collaborative technology, was getting the nuances of that dance right. And it's richly nonverbal in addition to being verbal, in addition to just inferring these, invisible states of minds, beliefs, intense desires from watching human behavior. I mean, again, it's again, I think one of the examples that because we as humans do it so effortlessly, we assume it's easier than it really is. I think it's one of the most sophisticated, hardest AI challenges facing us, is understanding how to create these robots or intelligent machines that can actually really collaborate with us as others, so sophisticated and complex and nuanced.
Yeah. Actually, it blows my mind when I think about the complexities when I'm interacting with my 2-year-old or 5-year-old, how sophisticated, how adaptive they are, and how quickly they learn. And you have to almost keep at pace as they are growing. If you look at the landscape of the recent advances in machine learning and AI, right? You'll see that many of these successes are data heavy, deep machine learning, hundreds and millions of data points and trials and images and sound recordings. And given the complexity of the problem that you just described, I mean, can you comment on, is data the way to go there? Or are there other mechanisms that we should think about that goes beyond the realm of just collecting and or doing some kind of reinforcement learning, for instance?
Sure. I mean, I think, the punchline is way more, right?
Yeah.
So even, again, when I started reading and studying a lot of the infant psychology, it was very apparent that even despite all our evolutionary advantages and endowments, when we were born into the world, there's a lot of machinery up there, right? It's not just data. It's a lot of machinery, a lot of structure that when we gain the experience from the world, that's what allows us to actually learn the right kinds of things. So it's got to be a combination of the right cognitive, emotional, social kind of mechanisms married with the experience that is what really kind of makes this happen. And of course, we also know that, in tragic situations where infants don't receive enough social interaction, they become, irrevocably severely retarded. So even, again, for ourselves, if we don't get the right interaction with others in the social world, we need the kind of scaffolding of a empathetic other to help us learn on the right path. So I think that was just, again, very eye-opening for me and just very kind of cognizant as we try to create these AI. So deep learning, of course, has been hugely successful, and there's still a lot of runway for deep learning. But, it is about, large data sets and pre-labeled data sets, which is very, labor intensive to create. There's a lot of kind of data that doesn't readily exist right now. So when you talk about this interpersonal, mutual regulated kind of dynamics of interaction, that has to be learned from experience. There may be ways of simulating that to get a bootstrap up on that, but human behavior, again, is so rich and nuanced and diverse. You still, I think, are going to need real interaction in order to learn the right kinds of behaviors and mechanisms. So I do think reinforcement learning is going to be important. I think it's clear that, we can also make these inferences, right? So the theory of other mind sorts of challenges. I mean, it's ways of even, simulating as a way of reasoning and predicting, I think, are other sets of mechanisms that we use. Empathy, the ability to learn by watching others, taking their perspective, kind of using their experience as a surrogate for your own experience. As social learning is a whole other suite of many different kinds of social learning that we use. So, again, I think we have so many ways of understanding the world and so many ways of learning from experience that it's going to be an orchestra of these kinds of methods to really get to the AI that we, associate with being kind of like the socially, emotionally intelligent creature that we can collaborate with. So we're just scratching the surface, just scratching the surface.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, it reminds me of, when you were doing the work on Kismet, you had mentioned that, one of the reasons that, Kismet doesn't talk because, it's depicting the state of the technology. It's still in infancy, so it's appropriate for us to basically talk to an infant. And, it's been almost 20 years since that work. What's your sense of what are the things that have evolved? Yeah. And are we still at a state of infancy, or has the technology matured? What's your take on that?
So, I think the technology has advanced, of course, a great deal, and yet it still has a long way to go, right? So, when we started with Kismet, it was very, very difficult to be able to have robust ASR, automatic speech recognition. The machine vision was very primordial. I think one of the most exciting things that's happened more recently is just the performance and affordability of those core technologies have advanced to the state, although they're far from perfect, they're interesting enough that you can start to create services, products, whatever you want to call it, that actually are interesting to people, right? They can certainly get a lot better, a lot more sophisticated, but at least you can start to build real systems that are actually able to provide value in the world. And in many ways, by doing that, just become painstakingly clear also about the opportunity and the challenge that still is ahead to really have these systems, meet our visions and our aspirations for what they'll be able to be in our lives. But just the ability to build these systems in a way that you can actually put them in the world is hugely important, and even from a research standpoint, hugely important, because until these systems are in real environments where real people are interacting with them, you don't really know what the phenomenon even is that you're trying to develop for and understand. So that's been tremendous, and fairly recent, right? And even right now, I would say, 43 million kind of smart speakers in people's homes now. People are living with AI in a way they never did before, and who is interacting with AI is fundamentally different. It used to be just kind of like people like us.
Yeah.
Now it's young children and seniors and everyone in between, and we know very little about how to design for the diversity of and needs and opportunities of such wide demographics. And we still don't understand what this long-term relationship is going to be, right? We build these very transactional systems by and large, but I think the next level is kind of the Star Wars dream, robot sidekick, helpful companion, not just a digital assistant, but a helpful companion that is with you and works with you towards your goals and really is your collaborator. That's still, I think, where this is going, right? To me, that's like a whole other layer beyond where we are right now.
No, you're absolutely right. So, I've been following, your work over the course of the time, and one thing I've realized that, there is a little bit of emphasis on, building robots of the form such that, interact with them. For instance, they'll have eyes, they'll have some kind of, capability of, making some kind of sound, expressions, etc. And you contrast that to something like, smart speakers that you talked about. And what role do you think, such, for the lack of better word, I'm using the word of anthropomorphization, for instance, right? Basically is important in establishing, like social rapport with humans.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think over the decades of science that's been done in this field, I mean, there's been so many rigorous randomized controlled trials, literally comparing a physically embodied robot with various cues and affordances to graphical agents on a screen, to voice-only agents, and now more recently to talking speakers. That I think the data and the evidence is pretty clear that the physical co-presence, social emotional embodiment of the technology actually makes a significant difference in how people engage with it. And again, it's just speaking to the fact that we have evolved specialized neural structures to do the social thinking and inference with another, that when you create a technology that gives us those hooks, our minds engage with it in a much richer, deeper way. And so if you can have that depth of engagement, when people can invest more of themselves and the multiple ways we have of understanding and reasoning and engaging with something, not just cognitive, but the social and the emotional and even the physical as well, the more successful often we actually are, because we're just able to put more of ourselves into that interaction. I think that's one of the key, consistent insights from a lot of the work that's been done. Now, how human is another question, right? And so I think this is an important point, because there's been kind of this assumption that the more plug-compatible human, the better. And I actually don't think that's panned out in the data. I think, there is a different kind of relationship that people can have with an other that's a non-human other. So you think about companion animals, right? We can have meaningful, beneficial relationships with non-human entities. Yeah. And in fact, one of the most profound things I think about companion animals is the fact that you can have this relationship that you feel is non-judgmental. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a different kind of social emotional support. So that's just to say that you can design a robot, a machine, that does not have to be human-like to have actually a really important kind of interaction relationship that provides tremendous value to the person. So we intentionally design our robots to be anthropomorphic, to be familiar enough that it can tap into the social thinking processes of the way that our brains are wired to work, without trying to overstep and being too human, because it actually starts to set up a whole host of expectations that, first of all, I think we would not be able to uphold. Secondly, from a philosophical standpoint, I feel like we've got a lot of people. Why do we want to make robots look like people? It's like people are people. What the intriguing design challenge here is how to create a technology that complements and dovetails and augments who we are and what we do well, as opposed to trying to more of what we are, right? Yeah. So for me, that's a philosophical stance. But I've definitely been finding that in creating non-human anthropomorphic-like robots has opened up huge opportunities for a different kind of relationship, a far more humanistic experience and relationship with technology that actually empowers people. So again, I think it's one thing to use a useful tool. It's another thing to interact with an empathetic, supportive other. And different ways we engage with the world are unlocked when we engage with an empathetic, supportive other. So when you look at things like around behavior change, or learning something new, or aging with independence, these are all domains where the social and emotional support are critical for our well-being, for our ability to flourish. We need to be able to extend the kind of services and support that people provide, either as family members or as professionals. You may be able to get world-class kind of support and intervention in the institution, but what's missing now is we can't bring that same quality of care to the home. And so when you think about the opportunity of scalable, affordable, high-quality, personalized services and support in the home, that's hugely empowering. I would love to have a personal tutor for my son living with us to teach him Mandarin. I can't afford that, right? But with the right kind of AI, that's possible. And I think, we just live in a time where people we need help. We need help in order to just, to be able to fulfill our opportunity, to open up opportunity, that, to me, that's one of the biggest promises of this technology, is really supporting people to, have the opportunity to become who we aspire to be. And I think the democratization of that kind of services and support is going to be critical in making that accessible to everyone, to have an AI, for AI, I think, to truly fulfill its potential. It needs to be able to truly benefit everyone, and as part of that, I feel it's not only enough that we try to design this kind of humanistic AI with that in mind, but also we need to empower children, people of all ages, to understand this technology, right? So, I'm a big advocate now of K12 AI Education, because children now are not just digital natives, they're AI natives, right? They're growing up now where they've always been able to talk to intelligent machines. People don't understand enough of what this technology is. They need to understand it. They need to grow up feeling empowered that they can create with it. And so I think this is also really important. So, if only a small subset of a population is knowledgeable enough to create solutions, by definition, it's only going to serve a narrow part of the population, and that's going to exacerbate any divide, not close it. So I think a lot about the democratization of AI and how you empower, many, many, many more people to create solutions of personal significance through this technology.
No, when you talk about AI fulfilling this ambitious goal. And one of the things that occurs to me is that we are asking this technology to actually do many things well together. It's being about, say, speech recognition, or recognize social cues, or take actions, or help us drive on the street safely, etc., etc. But as a species, we excelled at engineering where that was very well defined goal. So, for instance, let's build cars, let's build bridges, let's build airplanes. But now we're talking about a technology that needs to do many things well. So, from a design standpoint, like, how do you think about building such technologies? Like, are there certain principles in your work that you have you have found out that we should be aware of, and we should think about those?
Yeah, so I mean, I would definitely, in the nature of my work, so, the core of my work is really about how do you create the human-machine partnership, right? That I think the core fundamentals that cut across any sort of purpose or problem to be solved is what nature of intelligence and capability does the machine need to have to support this human partnership. And there's a lot we can learn from psychology around, the role of these nonverbal cues, to how you infer goals and intents and desires, and how you get that from language, and like all of these kind of, again, the social and emotional intelligence of the machine. And that is like a very rich, relatively very underexplored area of AI. But I think that's the foundation that cuts across all of it if you want to create collaborative technologies that empower people. Then you get down to the specific purposes, right? And there may be multiple purposes, but then there's a whole other host of design decisions you may make depending on how focused or broad that needs to be. So there's, I think, a core set of social emotional intelligence challenges that, again, we're still in our infancy of understanding. And then there's understanding how that intersects with the affordances of the utility and function that, which would influence the nature of the embodiment and the sensors and the other kind of knowledge and machine learning algorithm, that would go into creating that. But I think, when we were graduate students, I think it may still be the case, there was this bias that system integration wasn't interesting, that building the systems, that wasn't research, that was just engineering, that the science was something different, right? I think now maybe we're starting to deeply understand that the building the whole brain-body system is actually really hard research. Yes, really hard research. And we got to start thinking about the integration of all of these things rather than thinking we can go deep and narrow and core capacities and think, you just stick it together and it's solved. It's like, no. That's not the case. And then you have to put it in the world. And now you see how people engage with it. And then there's a whole other host of learnings and things you got to figure out. So, I mean, we live in interesting times.
Incredible. I mean, the whole area of robotics, social and emotional robots is, as you said, it's incredibly difficult engineering challenge. So, one final question that I wanted to ask you is that for someone who aspires to be in this field, who wants to work with robotics, who wants to think about, the society and affective systems and things like those, the barrier to entry right now is quite high, right? And in the spirit of democratizing, for instance, AI and machine learning to the world, how an aspiring student should think about. Do you have any any word of advice for them?
Yeah, I think, so that's also why I'm so passionate about, even pre-K12 AI education, because I want to make these experiences accessible for many, many more kids much earlier on. I think right now, based on when we were kids, we had Lego, right? Now there's Mindstorms and there's Scratch and there's all these other kinds of ways that kids can actually get into coding and programming and interacting with this technology, which is phenomenal. We need to bring it into schools. It needs to come into our K through 12 formal education process. There's movements to try to bring computer science in. With that, I think we want to bring in AI education. I just think that's important just to make the opportunity available to people. There are a lot of after-school activities. There are a number of products on the market. There's a lot of things you can do online. I think, the good news is there's ways that you can start to get your hands dirty with this kind of stuff. And what we really want to do is just make that richer and more empowering, I think, for kids to be able to apply that, honestly, at all ages, to things that matter to them. Because I think that's when you really start to develop empathy and you start to appreciate that creating solutions is not just this field or that field or the other, but it's how they all come together. And we're both from the Media Lab, so we,
Yeah.
we're already converts of multidisciplinary
Yeah.
thinking. But to build real things that impact real people's lives, the insights and the ways of understanding across these different disciplines, they have to come together. And that's when you really come up with solutions. I think that makes sense. But building that empathy and that ability to have those conversations and the appreciation of those different ways of thinking and understanding is also really important.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for taking the time. I enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, thank you.